I've lived on this land for over 20 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't mess with water, especially not mine. My spring has been bubbling from the hillside long before the HOA or even half the county existed. It's quiet, steady, and pure, flowing through the rocks that my grandfather once cleared by hand. But last month, the new HOA president, Claire Whitmore, decided my spring looked untidy. She said it ruined the aesthetic of their walking path and ordered a drainage improvement project. The next morning, my creek ran dry. By noon, the whole county's water pressure dropped. Firefighters couldn't fill their tanks. Schools closed early. And that's when I realized Claire hadn't just drained my spring, she had shut off the heart of the entire county. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because you're not going to believe what happened next. When the sound of rushing water vanished overnight, I knew something was wrong. The air around my property felt different too, still too quiet. Usually I'd wake up to the low hum of the spring bubbling near the cedar fence line. That morning there was only silence. I grabbed my boots and walked down toward the creek bed. The mud was cracked. The stones glistened, only faintly from what little dampness remained. A trail of tire tracks and deep trenches carved through the grass led right up to the HOA boundary line. I followed them, and that's when I saw it. An excavator bright green with a fresh HOA Beautification Project logo was parked halfway across the drainage ditch. Two workers in neon vests were laughing, sipping coffee, while a PVC pipe snaked its way from my spring under the fence and into their man-made retention pond. I shouted across the property line. "Hey, who gave you permission to dig on my land?" One of the workers shrugged. "Orders from the HOA, sir. Just cleaning up the stormwater flow." "Stormwater flow," my jaw tightened. "That's not stormwater. That's a natural spring. You just diverted an active groundwater source." They exchanged glances, suddenly less confident. But before I could press further, a white Lexus SUV rolled up. Out stepped her Claire Whitmore, the self-proclaimed savior of our modern neighborhood aesthetic. Perfectly ironed beige suit, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand, and a smile that could curdle milk. "Good morning, Mr. Allen," she said sweetly. "We're just doing a little environmental improvement. You should be thanking us for cleaning up that unsightly ditch behind your property." "Unsightly ditch?" I said, incredulous. "That ditch is a federally registered natural spring. It's been mapped in the county's water management database since the 70s. You just cut off the main inflow." Claire tilted her head, pretending to care. "Oh, please. I'm sure it's just runoff from your lawn or something." Our landscaper assured us it wasn't anything significant. "And besides, look how nice the path looks now." Behind her, the HOA's new pond gleamed like a suburban trophy. A dozen homeowners had already gathered with folding chairs, sipping iced tea, admiring their lake. Kids splashed near the shore. Someone had even placed a floating swan decoration. I took a step closer. "Claire, you can't just redirect water without a permit. That's illegal. You've potentially contaminated a protected source." Her smile hardened. "You're not part of this HOA, Mr. Allen. This area is under our jurisdiction. Maybe you should focus on keeping your old fence painted instead of worrying about our landscaping." That did it. I pulled out my phone and started filming. "Perfect. Could you repeat that for the record?" She froze for a second, then gestured sharply to the workers. "Pack up. We're done here." But the damage was already done. The flow meter at my spring intake showed a drop from 120 gallons per minute to barely 10. The soil where the water once pooled was sinking, drying fast. I uploaded the footage, sent it to the County Water Operations Department, and called my contact at the hydrology unit. By afternoon, the ripple effects were everywhere. My neighbor who ran a small dairy farm downstream called in a panic, my wells sputtering. "Ed, what the hell happened to the water pressure?" At 3 p.m., the local news reported that several schools in the area were closing early due to sudden water shortages. Restaurants in town had posted signs, "No tap water available, bottled only." Meanwhile, the HOA group chat buzzed with celebration. Screenshots later showed messages like, "Finally, the pond looks amazing. Claire really turned this place around. Best HOA project ever. Free water, no extra fees." Free water, sure. Courtesy of the same spring that supplied the county's backup reservoir. That evening, I met the county's on-call hydrologist at the edge of my property. A sharp woman named Maya Ortiz, clipboard, in one hand, flashlight in the other. "You weren't kidding," she muttered, shining her light into the dry channel. "If this spring's gone, our pressure stabilization model is toast." "It's been feeding the municipal main for years. So what happens now?" I asked. She sighed. We'll have to sample from the HOA's pond. If they've rerouted everything we need to check for contamination, but if they disrupted the groundwater recharge basin. She trailed off, shaking her head. That's a legal mess waiting to happen. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating non-stop. News alerts, calls from the sheriff's department. County Water had declared a Stage 2 emergency water reduction order. Every household had to cut water use by 50%. And there, on my local news feed, was a headline that made my blood boil. Local HOA creates community Lake County officials scramble to manage water supply issues. Claire was front and center in the photo, posing beside the pond, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "A shining example of community initiative." I drove straight to the HOA office that afternoon. The smell of fresh paint and lavender candles hit me the second I walked in. Claire was there sitting behind a desk stacked with pamphlets titled, "Beautifying Our Community Together." She didn't even look up. "If this is about the water again, Mr. Allen, I suggest you contact your local representative." "I already did," I said evenly. "They'll be contacting you soon. And maybe you should start preparing for the fines." Her laugh was sharp and theatrical. "Fines, for improving a ditch, don't be ridiculous. Tell that to the hospital that ran out of clean water this morning." That got her attention. Her pen froze midair. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "You think you're in charge here, Claire? But you just drained the very source that supplies every home in this county, including yours." She blinked. "That's impossible. Check your faucets tonight," I said, turning toward the door. "Let's see how impossible it feels when nothing comes out." Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The air smelled dry, metallic, and empty like a warning. I knew then that this wasn't just another HOA spat about fences or mailboxes. This was a disaster in the making. And Claire Whitmore had just turned my quiet spring into ground zero. 2 days after the confrontation, the HOA newsletter arrived in everyone's mailbox. Across the top, in bold letters, "A cleaner, safer neighborhood, thanks to our new water project." Beneath the headline was a photo of Claire standing triumphantly beside the lake she'd stolen, arms folded chin high like a queen surveying her artificial kingdom. The article claimed the natural runoff had been successfully redirected to reduce mosquito habitats and improve visual appeal. I nearly choked on my coffee. There wasn't a single mention of the spring, the diversion pipe, or the fact that half the county was under a water use restriction because of her stunt. I walked to my study, turned on the lamp, and opened my old file cabinet. I'd kept every document related to the spring since the day I bought the property: permits, geological surveys, flow tests, the original county hydrology map from 1978. I spread them across the desk like puzzle pieces. If the HOA wanted a paperwork war, I was ready. I spent the entire morning filing 3 formal complaints: an emergency interference report to the County Water Authority for illegal diversion of a protected groundwater source, a notice of trespass and environmental damage to be delivered by certified mail to the HOA board, a request for a temporary restraining order to stop any further beautification projects within 50 feet of my property line. By lunchtime, I had documented everything: time-stamped drone photos showing the excavator pipe installation and even a video clip of Claire telling me, "It's just runoff." But while I was dealing with the bureaucracy, the real-world impact was spiraling out of control. At 2:00 p.m., the local fire department held a press conference. The chief, sweating under the midday sun, stood beside a tanker truck and said, "Due to insufficient water pressure in rural zones, we're relying on reservoir reserves and imported supply until the county restores flow." That flow was my spring. Meanwhile, social media turned the HOA pond into a minor celebrity. Drone photos flooded Facebook captions like "Beautiful Community Lake," and finally, "Some value for our HOA fees," flooded comment sections. People who lived miles away came to jog around it or take selfies. And yet, beneath that glittering surface, the water had already started to stagnate. The landscaper, a young guy named Tommy, pulled me aside one evening. "Mr. Allen," he said nervously, "Claire told us it was just an irrigation channel, but when we dug in, we hit rock pressure. The water came up like a geyser." I told her this wasn't storm runoff, but she said, quote, "Don't overthink it, just make it pretty." I nodded grimly. "You kept your receipts right." He blinked. "Receipts. For the work order. Keep them. You might need them later." That same night, I attended the HOA meeting, uninvited of course, but open to the public. The room was packed with homeowners sipping sparkling water, oblivious to the irony. Claire stood at the front, glowing under fluorescent lights, flipping through PowerPoint slides labeled "Community Improvement Initiatives." When she got to the slide about the lake restoration project, I raised my hand. Claire, how exactly did you determine that the spring behind my property was non-potable runoff? She smirked. Our licensed landscaper confirmed it. We consulted the county's public drainage map. I pulled a folded document from my folder. You mean this map? I spread it on the table. Because the blue line you redirected isn't public drainage, it's a municipal groundwater recharge channel. It's protected under County Code 42.07. A few murmurs rose from the crowd. Claire laughed nervously. You're mistaken, Mr. Allen. Our HOA council reviewed the plan. Then your council might want to reread Section 8 of your own covenant, I said. It specifically prohibits altering hydrological features without written consent from affected property owners. A middle-aged man in the back, a retired teacher, spoke up. Is that true, Claire? Her lips tightened. We'll verify it. But I could see it in her eyes she hadn't verified anything. She'd acted on ego, not evidence. That night, as I drove home, the radio broadcast the county's emergency notice. Due to infrastructure complications, residents are advised to boil water before use. Hospitals are switching to reserve tanks. Please conserve water. Hospitals, children, farmers. All because of a decorative pond. I stopped at the dry creek bed and stared at the moonlight glinting on the empty stones. My grandfather used to say, "Water remembers who respects it." I wondered what it would remember now. The next morning, I got an email from the county clerk's office. Your complaint has been received. Due to volume processing may take up to 10 business days. 10 days. The county had 10 days to process a complaint while the town's taps were running dry. Claire, meanwhile, was busy filming a community update video. I watched it on Facebook. She stood in front of the lake wearing a bright pink blazer, smiling into the camera. We're proud of what we've accomplished together. The HOA is working hard to make this neighborhood a model for sustainability. Ignore the rumors. Everything we've done is within our rights. Some people just don't appreciate progress. Progress, I muttered, closing the laptop. That afternoon, a sheriff's deputy showed up at my gate. Afternoon, Mr. Allen, he said, tipping his hat. Got a call from the HOA. They're accusing you of harassment. Harassment, I asked. For what? Sending legal paperwork? He shrugged. You know how it is. Paper cuts both ways. Just keep it civil, all right, I sighed. Trust me, deputy, I'm the civil one here. When he left, I sat on my porch and watched the horizon fade into orange and pink. The smell of algae drifted faintly from the direction of the new pond. That evening, Maya from County Water called. Preliminary test results just came in, she said grimly. High nitrate levels rising, bacteria counts. If that water's feeding back into the system, we've got a contamination risk. I rubbed my temples. So what now? Now we trace the flow, she said. And if it connects back to the county main, the way I think it does, your HOA just poisoned its own supply. Her words echoed in my head long after she hung up. Somewhere deep underground, the natural veins of the land had been twisted by arrogance, and I had a feeling the price of beautification was just beginning to surface. By the next morning, County Water had gone from concerned to mobilized. Pickup trucks with the blue county seal rolled into my driveway at sunrise. Engineers, hydrologists, and technicians spilled out carrying sampling kits and survey rods. Among them was Maya, looking far less calm than the day before. Ed, she said, tightening her ponytail, this isn't just a local issue anymore. The spring is part of the regional drought resilience network. If it's offline, the whole system's losing head pressure. Head pressure, most folks didn't even know what that meant. It's the push of water that keeps the whole grid balanced like a heartbeat. Without it, the main pumps, strain pipes rattle, and sooner or later the entire system collapses. We hiked to the top of my pasture where the old cedar post marked the spring head. The ground there was soft, almost breathing with moisture. Maya crouched down, lifting a small metal hatch camouflaged under grass. Beneath it sat a weathered telemetry box with faded stickers, property of County Water Operations. Looks like this was installed in '92, she murmured. Telemetry uplinked to the municipal main. It's been part of the supply chain for decades. I folded my arms. So that means the HOA basically stole from the county, she said flatly, and contaminated it in the process. We followed the buried conduit downstream until we reached the HOA's new pond. What had once been clear, Springwater now looked like a giant bowl of cloudy soup. The surface shimmered green in patches, and a faint odor of algae hung in the air. Maya motioned to her crew. Sample points every 20 feet. I want full panels, nitrates, coliform, turbidity, the works. I stood beside her, watching the homeowners jogging past with their dogs waving cheerfully. None of them had any idea that their beautiful new lake was slowly turning into a bacterial breeding ground. Do they even know? I asked quietly. Maya shook her head. They will when the test results come back. But that's not the big problem. I frowned. What could be worse than contamination? She exhaled, pointing toward the far end of the pond where the drain pipe disappeared under a slope of manicured grass. That pipe runs right into the stormwater overflow, which connects to the municipal catchment basin. Meaning if pressure equalizes, the contaminated water can backflow into the county system. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. My quiet little spring wasn't just a trickle of water anymore, it was the hinge point of an entire county's well-being. And the HOA had turned it into a liability overnight. That afternoon, Maya's supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Daniel Kerr, arrived in a county truck. His expression was the kind of calm you only see in people who've dealt with bureaucratic disasters for a living. "Mr. Allen," he said, shaking my hand, "we're issuing an emergency stop work order on the HOA's project. You'll start seeing sheriff's tape by sundown." I nodded, glad to hear it. But Claire's not exactly the type to respect tape. He smirked. "Then we'll make her respect injunctions." While the county worked, I decided to document everything more thoroughly. I installed data loggers along the spring path to measure flow temperature and pressure. At night, I compared those readings with the county's municipal telemetry reports that Maya forwarded discreetly. Sure enough, every time the HOA ran their fountain or irrigation system, the county's pressure graph dipped. The proof was undeniable. Meanwhile, the HOA's propaganda machine kicked into overdrive. Flyers appeared on doorsteps, claiming that certain residents are spreading false rumors about our new community lake, and that the HOA board has acted with full environmental responsibility. On the local Nextdoor app, the thread was even worse. Claire W. "Some people think they own nature. We just redirected excess runoff. Everyone should appreciate our efforts." Resident Anonymous. "But why are our faucets running brown?" Claire W. County issue. "Nothing to do with us." Every time I read one of her posts, I could feel my blood pressure rise to match the water line that wasn't there. That night, Maya stopped by my porch again. She carried a laptop, her screen glowing faint blue in the darkness. "Test results are in," she said. "You were right. Coliform levels are triple the safe limit. Nitrates off the charts. If that water reaches the main reservoir, it'll trigger an automatic health emergency." I leaned forward. "What happens next? We'll have to prove the direct connection," she said. "The HOA's claim is that they never touched municipal lines, so we prove they did." Maya smiled slightly. "Exactly." She tapped her keyboard, showing me a satellite map overlay. "See this. The HOA's retention pond drains into a culvert, originally designed as overflow for your spring channel. When they redirected it, they opened a direct line into the municipal pressure valve system. Every gallon they steal destabilizes the grid." I stared at the glowing map. "You mean one HOA's vanity project nearly crippled the whole county?" "Not nearly," she corrected. "It already has." Over the next 2 days, county engineers excavated the diversion line. Underneath a decorative layer of fake rocks, they uncovered a 6-inch PVC pipe feeding directly from my spring. The evidence was clear as daylight, and Claire's signature was right there on the permit request to reroute water for landscape enhancement. When I showed up at the site with my camera, Claire stormed out of her SUV. "What are you doing here? You can't film on HOA property." "Actually," I said calmly, "this is still within the county's easement. You might want to read the deed before yelling about boundaries again." She went red. "This is harassment." "No, this is documentation," I replied. "You stole county water, Claire. You can't spin that into a beautification project." Maya stepped between us, holding up her badge. "Miss Whitmore, by order of the County Water Authority, this site is under investigation. Any further interference will be treated as obstruction of an environmental inquiry." Claire's voice cracked. "You can't do this. We're a private community. Then you should have stayed on private property," Maya said coldly. The crew began sealing the diversion pipe with concrete, and as I watched the last of the false pond drain into the earth, I felt something I hadn't felt in days: vindication. Still, the damage was far from over. The spring's pressure had dropped dangerously low, meaning the aquifer needed time to stabilize. And in the meantime, half the county was still boiling water, rationing, and waiting for relief. Before leaving, Maya turned to me. "We'll file the final report by morning. But Ed," she paused, "get ready. When the results go public, this isn't just going to be a scandal, it's going to be a reckoning." I nodded slowly. "Good. It's about time someone held the HOA accountable for something bigger than lawn height." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of clean earth again. Maybe, just maybe, the spring was remembering who respected it. The very next morning, my phone buzzed with 3 calls before sunrise: the sheriff, a county attorney, and my neighbor John, who sounded half asleep and furious. "Ed, you did it," he said. Sheriff's taping off the HOA lake right now. Claire's out there screaming at deputies like a banshee. I grabbed my thermos and stepped out onto the porch. Down the road, flashing red and blue lights cut through the dawn fog. Deputies were stringing yellow county property do not cross tape around the newly drained pond. Across the way, Claire's Lexus idled headlights, glaring like the eyes of a cornered cat. By the time I walked over, she was mid-tirade. "You have no jurisdiction here," she shouted at Sheriff Dalton, who stood solid as a fence post, hands on his duty belt. "Ma'am," he said, in that slow, unbothered drawl of his, "I got a court order signed by Judge Reyes. You can take it up with him if you like." Claire spun toward me when she saw me approach. You caused this circus, correction," I said. "You caused it. I just filed the paperwork." She glared daggers. "You think you're clever, don't you? Running to the county, crying about your little puddle." "That little puddle," I replied, "evenly happens to be the primary recharge source for the municipal reservoir." "You didn't just break an HOA rule, Claire. You broke state law." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore, the courts issued a temporary restraining order. You and your contractors are prohibited from performing any work near the spring until further notice." She threw her hands up. "This is harassment. We're being punished for trying to make the neighborhood better. Tell that to the hospital running on bottled water," I said quietly. Her expression faltered, but only for a second before she plastered on that fake composure again. "You'll regret this, Mr. Allen. The HOA board won't stand for this abuse of power." I almost laughed. "Funny thing about power, Claire, it doesn't come from clipboards and Facebook posts. It comes from knowing what you're doing." She stormed off toward her car, slamming the door so hard the echo lingered down the street. That was the morning the tide finally began to turn. By noon, every mailbox in the subdivision had a notice taped to it. HOA work suspension, pending county investigation. Some residents were confused, others angry. A few even thanked me quietly as I passed by. But by the afternoon, Claire had already crafted her counterattack. She called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse. I went partly because I knew she'd try to spin the story, and partly because I wanted to watch her dig her own hole. The meeting room was packed. Folding chairs lined every wall, and tension hung thicker than summer humidity. Claire stood at the podium wearing a crimson blazer, a power move probably meant to intimidate. "Fellow residents," she began, voice trembling, just enough to sound emotional but not weak. "We've been targeted by an overzealous neighbor and an overreaching county government. Our efforts to beautify this community have been twisted into lies." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. She continued, "Mr. Allen's accusations have caused unnecessary panic. We have done nothing illegal. Our board's landscaping project followed all necessary guidelines." That's when I stood up. "Mind if I ask a question, Claire?" Her jaw clenched. "Make it quick. Did your guidelines include this?" I held up a photo on my tablet, a time-stamped image of the excavator digging straight through the water conduit. Gasps filled the room. "Or this one." I swiped to the next, her signature on the unauthorized work order. She froze. That's taken out of context." "Context," I said, stepping closer. "The county has declared an emergency. People are boiling their water because of what you did. You don't need context, you need a conscience." The room erupted. Half the residents began whispering, others demanded answers. The HOA's treasurer, a nervous man in his 60s, stood up and asked quietly, "Claire, did you really sign that order?" "I was told it was standard," she snapped. "Our landscaper said," "Actually," I interrupted, "your landscaper told me he warned you not to dig. I've got his statement here. That did it." Her composure cracked like a dam giving way. "Enough," she shouted. "You think you're some kind of hero, Allen. You're just a bitter old man with a muddy yard and too much time." I smiled faintly. "And yet here we are, with the sheriff outside protecting my muddy yard while your pond turns green." She slammed the podium and stormed out, leaving the room in awkward silence. After the meeting, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in copper and violet. For the first time in weeks, the faint gurgle of returning water whispered through the rocks. The spring was coming back to life. But my peace didn't last long. That night, my security cameras caught 2 HOA board members walking along my fence line with flashlights. They stopped near the telemetry box, the same one Maya's team had inspected and crouched. I zoomed in. One of them tried to pry the lock open. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand. "Evening, gentlemen," I called out. "Lose something." They froze like kids caught sneaking cookies. We were just checking the drainage," one stammered. "Funny," I said, "because the drainage belongs to the county and that lock belongs to me." Before they could mumble another excuse, I lifted my phone. "Smile for the camera. The flash lit up their startled faces before they bolted back toward the street. The next morning, I sent the footage straight to the county attorney. By noon, the HOA received a formal notice of criminal trespass. If Claire wanted a war, I was now playing on my home field paperwork, data, and truth. Still, the ordeal wasn't over. The HOA board, in full panic mode, tried to retaliate the only way they knew how, by fining me. I received 3 violation notices in one envelope: failure to maintain fence aesthetic, excessive vegetation near property line, unneighborly conduct during community meeting. Each fine was $250. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Then I stapled the letter to a new complaint titled Retaliatory Enforcement Practices and mailed it right back, certified, of course. That evening, Maya stopped by again, exhaustion written on her face. "You won't believe this," she said, sitting down on my porch rail. "The county council just passed an emergency motion to classify your spring as critical infrastructure. That means any interference is now a federal issue." I whistled low. "Federal, huh? That's a big upgrade." She nodded. "And the hearing's tomorrow morning. They want you to testify." I took a long sip of my coffee. "Guess it's showtime." Maya smiled. "Claire won't know what hit her." As the crickets sang in the twilight, I leaned back in my chair and thought about how all this started. One self-important HOA president who couldn't tell a spring from a puddle. Tomorrow, the truth would flow freely again. And this time, nothing, not an HOA rulebook, not a smug smile, not even a crimson blazer could dam it up. By the time I arrived at the courthouse the next morning, the whole county was already in crisis mode. News vans lined the street like vultures waiting for fresh roadkill. Their satellite dishes glinted under the pale morning sun, all pointed toward the courthouse steps, where a dozen reporters were setting up cameras. Inside, the tension was thick enough to chew. Maya was already there, leaning over a table stacked with files and printed graphs. "You're going to want to see this," she said, sliding a folder toward me. The report was damning. Coliform levels 11x higher than baseline, nitrates elevated beyond agricultural safety limits. In plain English, the HOA's lake wasn't just dirty, it was a biohazard. "Claire's Pond is now officially classified as contaminated stormwater," Maya said grimly. "County Health declared a boil water advisory this morning for 3 districts." I exhaled slowly. "And let me guess, Claire's still claiming it's my fault." Maya smirked without humor. "You guessed right." We didn't have to wait long to see how far she'd take it. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, a press conference began outside the HOA clubhouse. Claire stood behind a podium draped in the HOA banner, her signature crimson blazer looking like a battle flag. A small crowd of residents gathered as she began, voice trembling with performative sincerity. "Our community has become the victim of sabotage," she announced dramatically. "Certain individuals have tampered with local water systems, spreading lies to damage our reputation. These malicious acts have endangered families and caused widespread panic." She paused, letting her words hang in the air like bait. Cameras flashed. "The individual responsible," she continued, "is currently under investigation for tampering with drainage infrastructure and falsifying environmental data." I nearly dropped my coffee when I heard that on the live feed. "She's accusing you," Maya said, flatly flipping her phone toward me. "She's trying to flip the narrative." "Well," I said, "that's one way to find out what rock people hide under when you shine the truth on them." Within hours, the blame game reached fever pitch. Social media exploded with arguments, theories, and conspiracy threads. One post read, "HOA hero exposes local saboteur trying to ruin community project." Another replied, "He literally warned them this would happen, and now we have algae instead of water." By noon, the county hotline was overloaded with calls. Hospitals requested emergency tanker shipments. Schools switched to bottled water for lunches. The local fire chief went on record saying, "We're rationing supply between stations." It was no longer an HOA issue. It was a countywide emergency. That evening, I drove past the HOA pond. It had transformed into a nightmare. The water glowed sickly green under the streetlights with a film of foam clustering along the edges. The ornamental swan floated upside down. The air reeked of decay. And there, at the water's edge, Claire stood with 2 other board members, their faces pale and tense. I rolled down my truck window. "Beautiful evening for a swim," I said dryly. She turned, eyes flashing. "You think this is funny." "Not at all," I said. "But I do think it's poetic. You drained a spring to make a lake, and now you've got a swamp." Her lip curled. "You'll pay for this." "No," I said. "You already are." The following day, the county health department issued an emergency declaration. The words "water contamination" event flashed across local TV screens. A map displayed all affected zones, nearly half the county shaded in red. That same morning, a convoy of water trucks rolled through town, escorted by deputies. Residents stood in line with jugs and coolers. Kids held handmade signs that read, "Need clean water." As I helped distribute cases of bottled water outside the fire station, one elderly woman touched my arm. "You're that man with the spring, aren't you? God bless you, son. If you hadn't spoken up, we'd still be drinking that poison." Her gratitude hit me harder than any courtroom victory could. Meanwhile, Claire was nowhere to be seen in public. The HOA clubhouse was closed pending maintenance, though everyone knew she was hiding from the media storm. When the county subpoenaed the HOA's internal emails, everything unraveled. The evidence was brutal. Claire had ignored 3 warnings from the landscaper, 2 from residents, and even 1 from the HOA's own maintenance coordinator, who had written, "Not sure we should redirect this flow, seems like part of the natural water system." Her response? "Do it anyway, nature doesn't pay HOA dues." The quote went viral within hours. Memes followed. One image showed her standing over a cracked desert riverbed with the caption, "Beautification complete," but as funny as it looked online, the real consequences weren't. The contamination had seeped deep into the soil. Repairs would cost millions, and the county wanted someone to pay. 3 days later, a formal hearing was scheduled. The courtroom was overflowing. Reporters filled every bench. Claire sat at the defense table, clutching a binder, her face pale but defiant. Her lawyer, a sharp-suited man with too much gel in his hair, whispered furiously beside her. Across the aisle sat the county's legal team, and Maya holding up her field reports. I took my seat behind them, hands folded. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, entered briskly. "This hearing will determine liability and immediate remediation orders concerning the unauthorized diversion of the Allen Spring." Claire's lawyer started with bluster. "Your Honor, this entire event has been exaggerated. My client acted in good faith to improve community aesthetics." The judge cut him off. "Good faith doesn't sterilize bacteria, counsel. Proceed carefully." When it was my turn to testify, I spoke plainly. "Your Honor, I'm not here for revenge. I just want the water restored and the truth recognized. My spring isn't just my property, it's the county's lifeline." I handed over the time-synced data logs, showing the exact moment the HOA diverted the flow, matched perfectly with the timestamp of the county's pressure drop. Maya followed with test results, contamination maps, and photos of the HOA pond, glowing under the night sky like toxic soup. When it was Claire's turn, she hesitated, clutching her papers. "I didn't know," she said finally, voice cracking. "I was told it was runoff. I didn't mean for this to happen." Her lawyer squeezed her arm, but it was too late. The mask had slipped. The judge nodded slowly. "Ignorance is not an excuse for negligence. You were warned." Repeatedly, the gavel struck once sharp and final. The court recognizes the HOA as liable for willful interference with protected infrastructure. A full restoration and cleanup order will be issued immediately. Outside reporters swarmed as we exited. One asked me, "Mr. Allen, what do you have to say to the HOA after all this?" I paused, adjusting my hat. "They wanted control," I said. "They got responsibility instead." The crowd murmured as Maya smiled faintly beside me. For the first time in weeks, I heard the faint trickle of water again, the sound of the spring returning quiet but unbroken, and I knew this fight wasn't about property lines anymore. It was about respect for nature, for community, and for the truth that always finds its way back to the surface. The official trial took place 2 weeks later in the county courthouse, a gray concrete building that looked as tired as everyone inside it. By then, the story had spread far beyond our little town. News outlets from Denver, even one from Los Angeles, were running pieces with headlines like "HOA drains," "Spring paralyzes," "County water supply," and "The beautification project that broke a county." I arrived early wearing my cleanest plaid shirt and jeans, the same outfit I wore when I bought the property 20 years ago. I didn't come dressed for battle, I came dressed for truth. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt electric. Every seat was full, with homeowners, reporters, county officials, and even a few state water regulators sitting shoulder to shoulder. Claire sat across the aisle at the defendant's table, flanked by 2 lawyers and a half-empty bottle of sparkling water. Her face was pale but tight with pride. She still believed she could talk her way out. When the judge entered, the room went silent. The same woman who'd issued the injunction, Judge Reyes, looked weary but sharp. She adjusted her glasses, then nodded to the clerk. "Court is now in session. Case number 47 to 2025, County of Hillsborough versus the Green Ridge Homeowners Association." The county prosecutor began with precision. "Your Honor, this case concerns the reckless diversion of a protected natural water source, Allen Spring, by the Defendants Homeowners Association under the direction of its president, Mrs. Claire Whitmore. He turned toward the screen, clicking a remote. The first slide projected the before and after drone photos I had taken the lush flowing stream beside my property and the dry, cracked earth that came after. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Next slide, the HOA's artificial pond now reduced to a murky, algae-coated crater. Mrs. Whitmore and her board authorized excavation across a property line without legal permission, the prosecutor continued. They ignored multiple warnings, disrupted municipal water operations, and caused contamination requiring a county-wide emergency order. The damages, both financial and ecological, are unprecedented. Then he gestured to me. Mr. Allen, please take the stand. I walked forward, each step slow and deliberate. Sitting down, I met the judge's gaze. Mr. Allen, she said, in your own words, explain what you experienced. I cleared my throat. Your Honor, for 20 years, that spring's been the quiet pulse of this land. My grandfather dug its first channel. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone who drinks from the tap, every farmer who waters his crops, every firefighter who fills a truck. When the HOA cut that flow, they didn't just drain my spring. They drained the county's lifeline. I handed over my compiled data logs, time-stamped readings, rainfall charts, and the pressure graphs Maya and I had synced together. These proved the exact moment of diversion matched the pressure collapse in the municipal system. Then Maya took the stand. She explained everything in clear professional terms: the telemetry box, the pressure head, the contamination spread. She spoke like an educator, not a bureaucrat, and even the jurors who looked half asleep earlier were leaning forward now. When she was done, the prosecutor clicked one more slide. It was an email chain between Claire and her landscaper. Claire diverted anyway. We'll call it beautification. Nobody's going to miss a puddle. Landscaper, are you sure? It looks like a spring head. Claire, then make it stop looking like one. The courtroom went dead quiet. Even Claire's lawyer rubbed his forehead. The prosecutor looked up. Your Honor, this demonstrates willful negligence, not ignorance intention. When it was the defense's turn, Claire's attorney tried to paint the whole event as a misunderstanding. My client acted in good faith, he said. She was assured by third-party contractors that the project was safe. She trusted professionals. The judge's eyebrow twitched. Trusted professionals who installed an unpermitted drain into county property. An oversight, the lawyer insisted. That's when I leaned over to the prosecutor and whispered, "Time for the trust documents." He nodded and approached the bench. Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to submit one final exhibit. He pulled out a slim folder and handed it to the clerk. This is the source water trust deed, established by Mr. Allen in 2014. It designates Allen Spring as a critical conservation asset under the Hillsborough County Water Resilience Program. The deed includes an automatic clause: any interference triggers a lien against the responsible entity's assets to fund restoration. Judge Reyes flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. Are you saying this was already protected by a legal trust? Yes, Your Honor, I said. It was designed to ensure this exact disaster could never bankrupt the county. A murmur spread through the crowd like wildfire. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. One of Claire's lawyers whispered something to her, but she shook her head, panic blooming on her face. The prosecutor pressed on. Per the terms of that trust, the lien has already been enacted. The Greenridge HOA's reserve fund, currently totaling $1.3 million, is frozen and redirected to the county's source restoration fund. Claire bolted upright. You can't do that. That money belongs to the homeowners. Judge Reyes's voice cut through the room like thunder. It belonged to the community that now has to rebuild its water infrastructure. You turned their dues into a disaster fund. She raised her gavel. This court finds the Greenridge HOA guilty of willful negligence, unlawful diversion of a protected resource, and environmental contamination. Immediate restoration is ordered. The HOA's assets will remain under lien until remediation is complete. Mrs. Whitmore, you are personally fined and barred from holding any public office or association leadership for 10 years. The gavel came down crack. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the murmurs rose into applause, not loud or triumphant, but relieved, like the sound of rain after a drought. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions. I kept my answer simple. I didn't want to fight, I said, but sometimes doing nothing is worse than war. The spring belongs to everyone, and it deserves to be protected like one of us. Maya joined me at the steps, holding a copy of the verdict. You realize this case is going to be studied in environmental law classes, she said. I chuckled. Maybe they'll title it The Day an HOA Learned Hydrology the Hard Way. She laughed. You really are impossible. Only when I'm right, I said, tipping my hat. Down the hill, I could hear the faint sound of water again, real, living water. My spring was flowing stronger by the hour, as if the land itself had been waiting for justice to be served. And though Claire's world had just collapsed, mine had come full circle, quiet, steady, and pure, just like the spring that started it all. The morning after the verdict felt different, quieter, cleaner somehow. The air carried that crisp scent that always comes after rain, even though it hadn't rained in days. It was as if the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath through weeks of chaos. I woke early, poured a cup of black coffee, and walked down to the spring. Mist hovered over the ground like a soft blanket. For the first time since the HOA's beautification, the sound of flowing water was strong again, clear, cool, unstoppable. The spring had returned to life. The sheriff's department had already removed the yellow tape around the site, and county engineers were setting up equipment nearby. Maya stood among them, clipboard in hand, a tired smile on her face. "Morning, Ed," she said, adjusting her ball cap. "You'll be happy to know the aquifer's pressure has normalized. The system's stabilizing faster than we predicted." I nodded. Nature has a way of fixing what we break if we give it a chance. She smiled softly. "You gave it that chance." The county crews spent the next week dismantling the remaining drainage lines the HOA had installed. Bulldozers scooped up the PVC pipes like bones from a battlefield. Environmental technicians collected soil samples and began the long, patient work of replanting native vegetation along the banks. When the first stream of crystal-clear water surged through the repaired channel, the workers actually cheered. A few even clapped me on the shoulder like I'd done something heroic. But I didn't feel like a hero. Just a stubborn man who refused to watch something precious be destroyed for vanity. Meanwhile, the Green Ridge HOA was in full collapse. The reserve fund, once their pride and power, was frozen and redirected toward restoration costs. The board had resigned in disgrace, leaving behind mountains of paperwork and furious residents. Without Claire's iron grip, the HOA fractured into chaos, emergency elections lawsuits between board members and homeowners demanding refunds for misused dues. As for Claire herself, well, poetic justice found her faster than any court could. The state environmental agency filed an individual negligence citation, and she faced personal fines in the six figures. Her name appeared in every local headline, and her once loyal supporters vanished overnight. A week later, I heard she sold her Lexus, put her house on the market, and moved out before dawn. No farewell meeting, no speech, just gone. The neighborhood felt lighter afterward. Without her constant emails, threats, and policy updates, people actually started talking to each other again, over fences at driveways at the corner cafe. For the first time in years, there was laughter. One Saturday morning, a few neighbors stopped by my gate with shovels and gloves. "We figured we owe you one," said Mrs. Thompson, the retired librarian, who used to glare at me for leaving my barn lights on past 9 p.m. "Thought we'd help replant along the creek." I looked at their mismatched gardening tools, their hopeful smiles, and couldn't help but grin. "Well," I said, "just don't expect me to pay HOA dues for it." They laughed, and for the next few hours the sound of laughter mixed with the rush of clean water. Together we planted willows and wildflowers along the banks, the same plants my grandfather once grew here. It felt less like rebuilding and more like remembering. A few weeks later, the county held a small public ceremony at the Springhead. A polished bronze sign was installed on a stone marker Allen Spring Conservation Site dedicated to the preservation of natural resources and the reminder that community begins with respect for water, land, and each other. When the ribbon was cut, applause filled the valley. Cameras flashed, children splashed their hands in the cool current, and Maya gave me a quiet nod of approval from the crowd. After the speeches, a local reporter asked if I planned to sue the HOA for damages or emotional distress. I shook my head. "I'm not interested in punishment," I said. "They've already punished themselves. I'd rather put the money where it matters." So instead of pressing for compensation, I worked with the county to redirect the restoration fund toward a new initiative, the Clean Water Scholarship. Each year, 2 local students interested in environmental science would receive funding in the spring's name. The idea caught on faster than I expected. Donations poured in from surrounding towns, even from a few embarrassed former HOA members who wanted to make amends. By early summer, the restoration was complete. The creek wound its way through the meadow again, shimmering under sunlight like a silver thread sewing the land back together. Wildlife returned too, frogs, herons, even a family of deer that came to drink near dusk. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch sipping sweet tea, Maya stopped by. She looked different out of her county uniform, jeans, boots, and a relaxed grin. "You did good, Ed," she said, watching the light glint off the water. "Not many people would have fought that hard." I chuckled. Oh, I didn't fight for me. I fought for common sense, and maybe for a little peace and quiet. She smirked. You'll get that now. The HOA's understate oversight. It'll be years before they try another project. I raised my glass to peace and quiet. We clinked cups and watched the spring shimmer in the evening Sunday. A week later, I received a letter from the county thanking me for my public service and contribution to environmental stewardship. It came with a simple line that made me smile. Sometimes one person's stubbornness saves 1,000 people's water. I pinned it on the wall above my desk, right next to my grandfather's old black and white photo, the one of him standing knee-deep in the same stream, shovel in hand, grinning under the Sunday. Guess we did all right, Grandpa, I murmured. The sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky orange and gold. The spring kept running steady, proud, unbothered by the noise of men. Maybe that was the lesson all along. You can fence off lawns, draft bylaws, and build artificial ponds, but you can't own what was never meant to be owned. Water belongs to everyone, and it always finds its way home. Sometimes life's biggest battles don't happen in courtrooms or board meetings. They happen when you decide not to stay silent. My story wasn't really about a spring or an HOA. It was about pride responsibility and how easily we forget that progress means nothing if it comes at nature's expense. The HOA saw water as a decoration. I saw it as a living legacy, a quiet reminder that everything we build depends on something older and purer than ourselves. When they drained the spring, they revealed something uglier than dry rocks. They revealed how fragile our respect can be. But when the community came together to fix it, they proved something stronger. People can change. We can choose restoration over revenge, humility over arrogance. So wherever you're watching from, remember this: protect what's pure even when it doesn't seem grand. Speak up when silence feels safer, because sometimes one small voice can make an entire county listen. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Let's keep these stories flowing just like the spring that never stopped.